What up, Wizards? It's Dev from the Blaze, and it has been a hot 2 days since we banned 7 cards in Standard. I know, 2 days does not seem like a very long time, but rotation is in less than a month, and Edge of Eternity's spoilers start in 6 days. 6 days. I had like 2 more deck techs I wanted to do at least, if not like 3 or 4. You talk about 6 days? All right, I think I've composed myself now, but you probably get my point. We just don't have much time left until even more stuff starts happening in Standard. So I thought it was important to go ahead and jump on it and kind of look at what's doing well in just the first couple of days after these bans. And good news on that end is that there's really no end to the amount of volume that we have, man. We've already had 3 MTGO leagues and an MTGO challenge since these bans went live. That's a lot of data, and I've tried to comb through all of it here and list all the decks that have not only shown up, but how often they've shown up so we get a good picture of the format. So let's get to that. Let's talk about all 22 decks currently seeing play in post-ban Standard.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back to talk some numbers like an auctioneer. Like Nelly said, it's getting hot in here. Stop. What we're going to do today, again, is talk about all the decks that have been showing up. And I want to go ahead and get to the absolute best deck in the format, at least in terms of what data we have access to so far. And that has been Dimir Tempo, Dimir Midrange, whatever you want to call it. You know it, you probably hate it, or you play it if you don't hate it. And maybe there's even some crossover in that Venn diagram, but one way or the other. This has shown up far and away more than any other deck in this environment. 24 times in the last couple of days has this been present in an MTGO Challenge or League 5.0. And I think, just as importantly, in the Challenge, it actually put a couple of copies in the top 8. Dimir Tempo has been a good deck basically since the kitchen table when I was 11 years old. My buddy's got removal spells and counter spells, maybe one huge dude, he's going to kill you. And this is basically just that deck. When fair magic is real, Dimir Tempo will probably be a decent deck. But in this case, it's got really, really good pieces still. Kaito, Bane of Nightmares is in the deck and really a key piece for finishing a lot of games. But Deep Cavern Bat is just as annoying as it ever was. Enduring Curiosity draws a ton of cards. Just a couple of days ago, before the bans, it feels like we just couldn't really play 4 drops. Like, oh, you can flash this in on turn 4. No, you can't. You're dead. So it just didn't really matter. But Enduring Curiosity is back to being a really good Magic card. Flood Pit's Drowner is here. Another little tempo piece for the early game, and a really good one at that. Preacher of the Schism is still good. Never stopped being good. It was always decent against aggro, but will always be a fine creature. Spyglass Siren is a great way to get on the table on turn 1. Also excellent with Enduring Curiosity. Can still, provide value as late as turn 4. That's good for a 1-drop. And the map token's always great. 1 main deck copy of Sheldred. Welcome back to the format. Sheldred, hadn't seen you in a while. She's going to be rotating soon, but I don't think that's going to hit this deck too hard. I think what hits this deck the hardest is probably the loss of most of its key instants. Cut down, go for the throat. It's going to lose 7 cards just in these 2 pieces right here, and they are amazing removal spells too. It still has access to certain things. This list in particular will also lose Anoint with Affliction. So just again to really stamp in how much good removal is going to be lost upon rotation. All of these pieces. This deck plays 1 Phantom Interference, but sometimes you'll catch them playing more or 0. 1 main deck copy of Gix's Command is in here against the other aggro piles. This thing can be kneecapping. And then, even though Corey Steelcutter is gone from the format, as is Monstrous Rage, as is Up the Beanstalk, we're still going to play Duress in our decks. Why not? It's proven to be really, really good in the last couple of months. It's probably still really good. The lands include Fountain Port and a bunch of blue-black stuff. And as far as the board goes, more Anoint with Afflictions. This person may have assumed that we'd see more Oculuses or even Unstoppable Slashers or Mosswood Dread Knights. It makes sense to want to exile with your 2-mana removal spell. I also assume maybe that there's going to be a lot of people on Cacophony Scamp or other small creatures that you need to answer with an exile spell. So again, props for Anoint there. I think it's a good spell to use while you can. There's also an Urtai Resurrected, a fair magic card, a Fairy Mastermind, which rotates Usually Dimir plays more copies in the main deck. This deck does not, but that's not every Dimir deck either. 1 copy of Negate because we're blue, filling out the playset of Preacher of the Schism, 3 Tishana's Tidebinder against Agatha's Soul Cauldron decks, and other stuff beyond that, Planeswalkers and whatnot. Other Kaitos you can shut down sometimes with Tishana's Tidebinder. Spell Pierce is in there for pretty obvious reasons, and Soul Guide Lantern is the one concession for sideboard or graveyard-based decks in the environment. So this looks basically like it has always looked, hasn't changed a wink, and it doesn't need to. This has always been a pretty strong deck and was strong before the bannings. For that matter, this still showed up in MTGO League results, the week of the bannings. So, especially since they didn't decide to cut anything from it, it's still going to be really powerful, but it is going to lose more pieces in a lot of decks in just a few weeks here. So keep that in mind. Now, you might have been able to guess that Dimir Tempo was going to be one of the best decks in the new standard. Even an idiot like me was able to solve that puzzle pretty easily, but if you had to guess what the second best deck, or at least the one that's shown up the second most, in post-ban standard is, what would you think? Take a wild guess, because I don't know that you'd be exactly right. There's a lot of good answers to this question, but it turns out the correct one is Vivy Cauldron. This is a weird little combo deck that's shown up 12 times so far in results in just the last couple of days, which is only half as many as the Dimir deck, but it's still the only other deck in double digits so far. Let's take a look at this one. We got Vivy making a little soup here, and everyone knows what Vivy does by now, I assume. There's been way too much hype around this card. If you are brand new to Magic, you know what this Magic card does. It makes a bunch of mana, is what it mostly does, but it also gets relatively large, pings your opponent, all that's cool. It costs a lot to buy. It's a very expensive Magic card because it's a very broken Magic card, and everyone loves Vivy, for that matter. But what if all of your creatures could be Vivies? It could be so with an Agatha's Soul Cauldron on the table and a Vivy in your yard. Just exile the Vivy with the Soul Cauldron, and now suddenly all of your creatures can pay 0 mana and get you all the mana in the world. Draconotic's Engineer is in here because it's got another amazing activated ability to be able to pass around, make dragons all game, give haste to stuff. It gets a +1/+1 counter when it uses the ability. That's pretty good for Soul Cauldron and whatnot. Fear of Missing Out is in here because it's amazing, just incredible. Of all the decks that I thought I'd see Fear of Missing Out in after bans, this was maybe not the one that I was assuming it would be in, but there's also Marauding Mako in here and Tersa Light Shatter because we do discard a fair number of cards in this deck, but obviously Tersa works well with Marauding Mako. They can attack for a good bit just by themselves when they're kind of with each other. So I kind of like that. You play a Tersa on turn 3, attack with it, and your Mako got larger because you discarded those cards. That's pretty sweet early on in the game. Glacial Dragon Hunt is in here to basically remove creatures. One of the only other options we have for that is Into the Flood Maw, which is a full 4-up. If this deck can get tempo, then it can just kind of ignore what the opponent's doing once the combo's locked into place. And so Into the Flood Maw is one of the cheapest ways of being able to do that. It's also Winter Night Stories. This will help us discard cards as well. Good cards to feed Soul Cauldron, right? But it also has Harmonize, just like Glacial Dragon Hunt. Even if we're not tapping down creatures for the Harmonize, we produce enough mana with Vivy and creatures with Vivy's activated ability that we can just play these out of our yard for the full Harmonize cost without tapping creatures down, if that's what we want to do. That's a pretty good ability to have. 2 Wild Rides in here, good aggro card and great with Vivy or any creature with Vivy's ability, obviously. Proph's Eidetic Memory is a dream come true. This not only triggers Vivy and puts more counters on him and stuff because it's non-creature, but also no maximum hand size is very sexy. But apart from that, this draws a card when it ETBs and puts a bunch of counters on creatures. We hope to be drawing cards off Winter Night Stories, Glacial Dragon Hunt, and a bunch of other effects that are in this deck. Also interesting to have Agatha's Soul Cauldron as a 4-of in the deck because it keeps the format off of a lot of graveyard synergies that people were worried about before the bans and even after the bans. I had said that maybe Oculus was going to be everywhere. I was right about a few things, but not necessarily Oculus. And I think a lot of that is because Soul Cauldron being a 4-of and the second most important deck in Standard so far is really keeping a lot of people off graveyard shenanigans. But in any case, Proph's Eidetic Memory is a great card in decks like this, like the pick. As far as the sideboard goes, we've got cards like Abrade, Change the Equation, Disdainful Stroke, Negate, Spell Pierce, some counters for our blue deck. Scorching Shot is a removal spell. Ghost Vacuum also helps against those Reanimator piles, Omniscience piles, and other things. Oculus, Roots, right. More Enduring Curiosity, always more Enduring Curiosity in the board. Fire Magic is in here as kind of a sweeper at instant speed. That's kind of cool. So Lithomantic Barrage, again, against Oculi, but also against any largish creature or planeswalker in the right colors. So a lot of cool stuff going for us here. Really awesome sort of combo-y deck that is not necessarily the same build as all these other decks. How do you even categorize it, really? This is probably the coolest deck that's doing well so far this season, but it probably won't be long before we get sick of it. But next, the third most prolific deck since these bans happened, and it's only been like 48, 50 hours, but I think it matters, that mono white tokens, or mono white control, whatever you want to call this deck, has shown up 8 different times in results. Although, for what it's worth, I know it's only like a 24-hour span, but it does seem to have lost some steam from yesterday to today. Whether that's because mono white is bad or boring, I'm not actually sure, but this is another deck you probably know and either love or hate. I'm a fan of the mono white deck, and it does seem well positioned in a format where not only did we just lose an aggro deck that would be otherwise breathing down our necks, we don't have a lot of great options to answer, and the loss of the other best, mid-range card draw engine in the format, up the beanstalk. Caretaker's Talent would be a really, really good card now. So, again, well positioned. It's got some really good sweepers. Temporary Lockdown is still good while we have it. People are experimenting with Ultima. Sunfall's still seeing play. Day of Judgment is here, right? So, we've got Elspeth Stormslayer and Biza and blah, blah. This is a deck that we basically know the construction of, front and back at this point, but that doesn't mean it makes it bad. And as a matter of fact, again, I think with the loss of some other things in Standard, it really ups its stock. All right, mono white. I basically already told you all the cards that are in this deck. You play Elspeth Stormslayer, you play your Biza, but I guess, what else? Yeah, Sunfall's in here. Get Lost is a pretty obvious removal spell. Lay Down Arms is one of the better reasons to play mono white instead of adding a color. Day of Judgment, there she is. That's a good sweeper spell. You got your Caretaker's Talent. You knew that was going to be in here. It's kind of the, whole reason you build the deck in the first place. It's why Carrot Cake is a decent card. Along with Talent, it ain't half bad. You're almost playing bunnies over here. But in any case, I guess there are a couple of cards I want to point out that I didn't just mention. First of all, Enduring Innocence is a 4 of, so we basically have 8 Caretaker's Talent effects in this deck. That's a lot of drawn cards. And obviously, just like a Talent, this curves well into an Overlord of the Mistmoors. We're playing 3 copies of that, but it curves well into Biza, so long as it gets us the tokens. Elspeth Stormslayer, awesome with Innocence or Talent, and pretty obvious synergies here, but maybe the newest card in the deck that we haven't really seen much in the deck before is Voice of Victory. This is from Tarkir Dragonstorm, so a few months back now, but honestly, mono white hasn't really gotten to be a playable deck in the environment since Tarkir Dragonstorm came out, and maybe even a little bit before that, to be honest with you, right? I think that long ago we realized that Up the Beanstalk kind of outclassed some of the stuff that Caretaker's Talent was doing. Right, so, but it feels like Caretaker's Talent is so much older than it is. It's just Bloomborough. It's just like a year, But in any case, Voice of Victory shows up in mono white nowadays because it's just an obvious pick. Your opponents can't do stuff during your turn is just an incredible line of text. And it has the Mobilize, which makes the tokens for the Innocence, for the Talent, for the whatever. So, if you have an Elspeth Stormslayer out, you get 4 attacking tokens. That's pretty cool. So a lot of good stuff about Voice of Victory in the deck. It just, we hadn't really been playing mono white since the card came out. So might not have known it was in the deck, but it is. We play the 4 Fountain Port and the 2 Demolition Field. Even though the deck does play Lay Down Arms, we don't need too many planes in here to make that card worth it. Sunken Citadel is also a 4 of. It makes Fountain Port a little bit easier to activate for all the modes. Apart from that sideboard right here, we got Authority of the Consoles in case we're still coming up against aggro decks. Fill out the playset of Bees of the Bounding Spring to destroy evil because it's got a lot of things it can hit. Elspeth Stormslayer in here, a third copy. Stone Brain to pick apart, combo decks and such. Temporary Lockdown again against aggro. Rest in Peace against graveyard decks, and Overlord of the Mistmoors. We're going to fill out that playset when we need it. So again, pretty obvious sideboard here too. Mono white is just a strong deck. deck. And in a format where mid-range is playable again, it's obviously going to have a place. But the fourth deck we'll look at here today has only shown up 6 times in results. We still haven't crossed that 5 threshold, but we are getting into stuff that has not shown up quite as often, obviously. That said, it doesn't mean that Azorius Control is a bad deck either. Shout out to a couple of content creators who said that this deck might be good after the ban. CGB, Ash, Lizzle both had things to say about this deck, and they were obviously right. Even though it might not be the quote-unquote best deck in Standard right now, it is showing up in numbers that it definitely wasn't showing up in before. Again, not having, a card advantage engine they have to worry about the opponent playing on turn 2, like up the beanstalk, and especially not having the mice package just running them down is really going to spell, a lot of good news for an Azorius mage in this environment. It's everyone's favorite deck. Who doesn't like this deck? We got 4 No More Lies, 4 3 steps ahead, everybody. We are main deck counter and everything. We're having a fun time, ladies and gents. This deck is basically everything you expect it to be, but maybe slightly more threats than you would anticipate. You see the counter spells, the 4 Get Lost makes sense, 2 temporary lockdown. Why wouldn't we do that, Jack? We do have a Dreams of Laguna in here, and you might not expect that. This costs 2 mana for Surveil 1, draw a card, flashback for 4. Almost a deep analysis kind of effect. It's kind of like a think twice too. It's not a terrible looking Magic card, but I am a little surprised that it's here. Apart from that, stock up, I'm not surprised to see whatsoever. If you thought we were done with sweepers just because I showed you the temporary lockdown, no sir or madam. Here's Ultima right here. No Sunfalls in the deck. We're also going to take out all the artifacts. It's probably better than exiling at this very moment. So let's Ultima, ladies and gentlemen. All 4 copies of that. How fun. But there's also some threats. We've got 3 Meringue River Region, a really good card draw spell in this deck, and a pretty good late game threat as well that has a good enter the battlefield trigger. Horn Lockwell is actually slightly comparable to Meringue River Region in some way. Just a huge guy, that comes down in the late game, but also can bounce stuff, like that about it. Sort of bounce. I say bounce, I mean time ebb stuff. What do we call this effect? Put it on top. But anyway, Biza's in the deck as well. This will help you catch up against nearly anything. And deck doesn't play a lot of creatures, so you should get the fish off of it. We've also got Elspeth Stormslayer, just like the mono white decks, and this list, at least, plays an Ugin Eye of the Storms. You don't always see this in blue-white control, but this is the latest 5.0 I could find, and it did play a copy of Ugin. That's pretty amazing. You want to go over the top, Ugin definitely helps you do that. And once a blue-white control has Ugin in place, I could see that being, pretty hard to play around. That is real inevitability. If the blue-white deck gets to gain 3 life every single turn, yeah, that's probably going to be enough at that point. But we're playing 26 lands. I should point out the high land count and the 4 Fountain Port in this deck. We're actually not even on 4 Restless Anchorage. Just 2 of those. 4 Fountain Port, though, everybody. Sideboard is, again, about what you expect, but it's really important to look at the sideboard for a blue-white control deck to change the equation in here, and that is amazingly the only sideboard counterspell apart from the Defabricate, which can counter artifacts, enchantments, or activated or triggered abilities. So again, at the right time, hitting an Agatha Soul Cauldron as they're trying to do a thing can be great. Hitting a Vivy as they're trying to get the mana can be great. So pretty interesting, kind of like that. 3 Elspeth Smite to take out small ball aggro creatures, also exiles, that's pretty cool. Rest in Peace against the graveyard decks. Overlord of the Mistmoors when we need more threats. Tishana's Tidebinder again against Soul Cauldron. Other decks you might need it against. We've got River Churn Monument as a one-of in here to go along with the 2 copies of Jace the Perfected Mind. I imagine the Churn Monument is seeing like a tryouts, because Jace ain't going to be here forever, just here for a good time. Not a long time, just like another 3 weeks. So, maybe see how good Churn Monument can be in place of Jace. And obviously together the cards are great. I imagine you put this in against mid-range matchups of Caretaker's Talent and other control matchups. You might board the Jace in. So makes a lot of sense. Either way, blue-white control is mostly trying to finish with combat damage. We don't want to take too long to turn the corner with the mill planeswalkers and such. We just want to deny in the early game, remove that guy, counter that spell, and once we're in position, land a big haymaker and just finish the game. That's classic blue-white control. And again, as much as you might not like it, and as much as I might not even like playing against it, I think that just like healthy mid-range decks, good mid-range decks showing up, a good control deck being playable in a format is a sign of a healthy format. But the 5th deck we'll talk about today is finally An aggro deck. We found one at last. This archetype has been all but banished from the format at this point. That's not entirely true. There are multiple people trying to find the best aggro deck in the format, and this is not the last time I'll at least mention an aggro deck in this video, but it is maybe the last time we'll really take a good look at one. You probably know the Imidane's Recruiter deck back and forth at this point. You've played against it a lot, and it obviously loses a few pieces coming up, but it has still shown up more than any other aggro deck in the last couple of days so far, a whole 5 times in League and Challenge results up to this point. Hey, it's Recruiter. Don't you know this deck? By now, we do lose some stuff to rotation, notably Knight Errant of Eos and Gleeful Demolition down here, the thing that gives them 3 goblins in 1 turn for sacking an artifact. That's really good, along with Nesting Bot, Novice Inspector, all their 1-drops. So it looks like their 1-drop package has been tailored long ago to Gleeful Demolition, and losing Demolition is going to have to, they're going to have to rethink that 1-drop package. That could be good or bad, honestly, for a deck like this, but losing Knight Errant is going to be a massive blow, and I don't know if the deck can really recover from it. It's still got some really good starts with Recruiter, even without Demolition, but losing the card that provides its best starts and losing the card that provides its best, its ability to actually play into the mid game, its ability to restock on turn 3 or 4 and get a huge guy, that's a big deal. And really, the play of Demolition into Knight Errant on like turn 2 or whatever it is, if you can pull that off, losing that is obviously going to take a lot of explosivity away from the deck. So I think this deck, even though Recruiter does not rotate, does not have too much longer to live in Standard. So let's smoke them while we got them, I guess. This deck did not get any worse anytime in the interim, It's just wasn't the best aggro deck in Standard. Didn't leverage Monstrous Rage the best. Didn't leverage Manifold Mouse the best, So kind of got kicked out. But here we are. It does play a Wandering Rescuer in this list, but not in every list. As a matter of fact, a lot of these Recruiter lists are the loosest lists that we've seen so far in the video. Sure, Blue Eye Control plays different things from time to time, whatever. The list have been getting looser as we've gone on. And this is a good example of that. There's a lot of different ways you can build this deck right now, as long as you build the core of Recruiter, Knight Errant, the 1-drops, Gleeful Demolition. You see, this deck plays Sanguine Evangelist. It plays Resolute Reinforcements is basically part of the core too. Case of the Gateway Express is becoming more core by the day, but War Leader's Call is not necessarily in the core of this deck. You don't always see this, but it is a really fun card. I don't blame anybody for playing it, especially in a deck full of 1/1 tokens and such. So makes sense. We've got 21 lands, an incredibly low land count, and we're playing Mirex instead of Fountain Port in here. Sideboard, look at that. We've got Aven Interrupter. It's a creature that counters spells, notably sweeper spells. Especially if we go first, this can even counter a temporary lockdown or a split up. Chandra Spark Hunter is in here. A lot of these decks have been playing this as kind of a we have to go late creature factory when it needs them. I like that. Destroy Evil is a 3 of. Again, we see this in the board. Invasion of Gobakhan rotates, but it's really good at keeping your opponents off of sweepers, and later can protect your creatures from those sweepers. Torch the Tower is in here for more small ball removal when we come up against aggro, and then the requisite Rest in Peace is a 2 of in here, because our opponents are going to be doing graveyard stuff, so let's keep them off of Soul Cauldron or whatever it is, right? So this is Imidane's Recruiter. You know and hate it, or love it, or whatever it is. People have their opinions. I think that just having to play against, Recruiter the day after the bannings is a sign of why sometimes Magic players aren't the most creative people in the world, but hey, you want to win. Sometimes you don't want to brew, you just want to win, and that's why we see pretty obvious choices like Dimir, right? Dimir Tempo made too much sense, but obviously all the way down to Imidane's Recruiter is the best aggro deck in the format. People aren't necessarily trying to be the most creative out there. They're trying to win games, and these are the decks that do it. Now, for the last deck that I really want to take a good look at today, I have to choose one of the decks that has shown up at least 4 times in the last couple of days, and I have a few to pick from. At least 4 decks have shown up 4 times in the last couple of days, so it's all down to which one I want to look at the most. And to that end, there are a few of these that are kind of old decks that we've seen a bunch of times before, just like every other deck we've covered in the video so far. I do want something fresh, There's things like the Vraska Innkeeper's Talent, like in the game right there, combo deck, and Vraska's going to rotate soon, so I don't really want to talk about that. There's the Azorius aggro deck. In case you don't know this one, it's got like Regal Bunnycorns and Warden of the Inner Sky, and it kind of functions like a little bit more rotation safe version of the Imidane's Recruiter deck without the Imidane's Recruiter. There's also a Golgari Demons deck that's shown up 4 times in the last couple of days, and you know that one too. It's just literally Golgari midrange. Also Unholy Annex. So that, just like Dimir midrange and a lot of the other decks with swamps in them, are going to lose like its most reliable removal pieces in just a few weeks here. So a lot of decks that we've known for years and also lose stuff to rotation. I don't want to look at those. Again, let's look at something a little bit more fresh that doesn't lose as much in a month here. So with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on Naya Yuna. Here she is in all of her glory. We covered a deck very similar to this on Top 3 New Decks of the Week last week, but there have been some changes made to this build that I really like. So let's go over this in case you've never seen it before. Now, Yuna just came out in FF. This is one of the only new cards from FF to be a part of, post-ban standard, interestingly enough. I felt like we were seeing more cards from FF before the bans, which is odd when you think about it, but yeah, Yuna reanimates enchantments every turn, gives them abilities, ward among them, trample and lifelink among them too, which is really good. So the obvious idea here is to reanimate overlords. Reanimate your overlord of the Mistmores, and then suddenly you definitely get the tokens, even if overlord or Yuna or both get taken out. So that's pretty good. Trample and lifelink on a 6/6 is amazing. Overlord of the Boiler Villages, well, Yuna gives it lifelink, so that's pretty gross. It's going to hit something for 4, almost certainly destroy whatever creature it targets, and gain you 4 life. That'll get you back in the game. That's mid-range magic. Joshua Phoenix is dominant. Another FF card, and Brunhilde is in the deck as well. So multiple. And Esper Origins, we'll get to that in a second. So just the Final Fantasy deck. The new cards deck. I am an enjoyer of new cards. But Joshua Phoenix dominant also lets you discard the enchantments into your yard for Yuna to get back later. Terra also mills enchantments into your yard for Yuna to get back later, and also puts enchantments into your hand. That's disgusting. Fear of Missing Out is an enchantment that you can put back into your hand with Terra or reanimate with Yuna, and is amazing with these overlords when they have lifelink. This feels like the second coming of the Zur deck in some ways, big lifelink enchantment overlords and stuff. It's very similar to that deck, but with a little bit more resiliency, because even if you put their overlords in the yard or they discard them somehow, they're getting them back. And Yuna's actually a little bit tougher to deal with than she appears. So really solid graveyard deck here. And it does say something that even in a format that is aimed to take out graveyard decks, you've seen all the Rest in Pieces, you've seen the Ghost Vacuums in these sideboards so far, and you've seen the Agatha Soul Cauldrons in the main deck that can mess with your graveyard plans as well. And yet this graveyard deck is still doing the most in standard right now. So that's, I think, kind of a marker for success. If it can't get on its graveyard plan, it's still got big overlords. It's still got, Joshua can flip over for 5 mana and become a 4/4 flying lifelink Phoenix. That's tough to deal with. You can bring back Terras and Yunas if you want to. You can bring back an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges with the Phoenix's, 3rd chapter trigger. If that's what you want to do, that's really good. So, this deck actually has a lot of sort of lines it can take in the mid game. And this too was showing up from time to time in MTGO League results and such, even before the bannings. So in a deck where fair mid-range decks are real again, this is going to get even better, and I'm not surprised to see it show up. Here's Dredger's Insight, another relatively new card, this one from Ether Drift. This one mills a bunch of cards when it enters, is an enchantment for the enchantment synergies. You can put creatures into your hand so it finds your Yuna, finds overlords and stuff like that. You also gain life a little bit incrementally off of it. Sick card. Esper Origins also mills cards into your yard, but when you flip it over, look at this. You get to put a permanent card into your hand. You've probably surveilled one onto the top of your library. You can add mana off of it. That's really good in a deck like this. It's got all these big over-the-top plays, expensive creatures and stuff. And giving your creatures trample is incredible if Yuna's not on the table. For obvious reasons. Most of our creatures are really big. But apart from that, another incidental life gain piece. If you haven't noticed, Dredger's Insight, Esper Origins, the life gain from Yuna, and the lifelink on Phoenix when you flip it over. Like, there's a lot of incidental life gain in this deck, which is pretty important for mid-range decks to stay in. It's an important part of some engines, right? 25 lands in here, including a 3-of Starting Town to make sure we can hit our mana, and then we can still hit our mana after rotation. But you'll notice that this deck doesn't really lose any lands to rotation. That's kind of nice. But anyway, in our sideboard, we've got stuff like Authority of the Consoles. It's a pretty familiar sideboard. Authority of the Consoles, Get Lost, Ghost Vacuum, Fire Magic is in here. Exercise is one we haven't seen yet, but makes a lot of sense, exiling a bunch of different stuff. including large creatures. Dead Judgment, just to have a panic button. And then summon Knights of Round, I guess, for when we want to have some fun with it. Obviously, really, really good with Yuna. Apparently, this person and a few other people I've seen play it. It's often a 1-of in the board. Just couldn't find room for it in the main deck. I'm sure there's a matchup that this is really, really good in when you want to go wide more than you want to go tall. It's probably great in certain things, but I think we're just trying to have some fun with it one way or the other. It's nice to see a deck like this show up that isn't just the same stuff we've seen a million times before. Anyway, y'all, here's the final tally if you need a final tally, right? Dimir Control obviously in first, Vivy Cauldron, Mono White, and then it kind of drops off a good bit. You see a lot of decks here that have finished, 4 times, 3 times, and then we get to the one-time finishing decks, and there's kind of a lot of those too. So you could say there's 23 decks in this environment right now, or I think you could more accurately say that there's about 6 to 8 decks in this environment right now. Possibly even as many as 10, but I expect the chaff to get cut pretty quickly as we move through just the next couple of days here. But again, Edge of Eternity spoilers start soon, and those won't necessarily affect Standard right away, but rotation certainly will. Not all of these decks are going to be able to stand up once rotation actually hits them. Anyway, I gotta stop yammering. You guys let me know how you feel. Any decks you've encountered out there in the wild that you think are powerful, I want to know about them. And how do you feel about the data so far? How do you think it's going to shape out over the next week as the format adjusts and these decks learn to sideboard for each other or main board for each other or whatever it is, man? We feel like we are in the very beginning stages of a format that is still evolving right after, a new set came out or something. And that's a good feeling. So let me know what your takes are down there and do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Make sure you hit the like button before you hit the lights button. I'm still workshopping that. For the last 3 years, I've been workshopping it. If you haven't subbed to the channel for all the content I've talked about, you're probably not going to do it just because I ask you to do it now. But I'll remind you one more time. And we have a Patreon, just $1 a month to get in. You get to vote on content around here. But anyway, guys, that is Itsky Lowitsky. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.